what a team has done. Brigham Young, you could tell when we've talked to Kalani Sitake, he and his team had heard enough throughout it. Doesn't mean they won. They dominated. They were sick and tired of probably what happened to them back in Waco and how dominant and physical Baylor was, and you could hear that from him. He preached that every single day or every time we talked to him as well.
Yeah, he did. It was very clearly on their minds throughout the entire offseason. I mean, he mentioned it over and over again whenever Baylor was brought up was, the way they were embarrassed physically in that game. And, I guess we have a guest coming up, or we can kind of get into it a little bit here.
Jake Spavital is going to join us in about 5 minutes.
Yeah, so let's get into Baylor BYU. Great win for the Cougars and tremendous win for that program. I think that there is every reason to be ecstatic for the way that, they handled themselves and played, and the way the fans showed up was amazing. Just an incredible win. I think I'm just trying to kind of layer it in my head here, but, Jaren Hall was fantastic. I was, sitting there on Friday talking about the lack of wide receivers, not the lack of wide receivers, but I was saying, to make it very clear, that losing Puka Nacua and Gunnar Romney was a big deal. I was told by multiple BYU people, we've got plenty of receivers, and I said, that's fine, that's great, but if you take two top receivers, that's still a notable thing, which was all my point was. But to anybody who thought that, that means that they're wiped out at wide receiver, no, clearly Chase Roberts had other ideas, and so did a litany of other guys, which is pretty much what the BYU folks said on Friday. And, hey, I said if they have somebody step up and they make it no big deal whatsoever that Nacua and Romney aren't playing, then I'll come on here on Monday and say, hey, kudos to them. So kudos to them. Kudos to Chase Roberts. Kudos to Jaren Hall for being a great quarterback and making some tough throws and making some great plays. I thought, obviously Baylor did really well and stuff in the run game. Hall was able to get loose for some big pickups on a few occasions, but really hurt them more so with his arm. He and Roberts were a great duo. Defense played lights out and played really tough and physical. They matched, if not exceeded, Baylor's physicality throughout the night. The crowd clearly caused a lot of problems for Baylor and had Blake Shapen rattled on more than one occasion, if not more players rattled on more than one occasion, and got in their head a little bit. So I think, you combine just the play of Hall and Roberts and that defense and the BYU O-line to some extent. I mean, just everybody deserves credit to some extent, but those stand out in particular. You combine that with the crowd, and you combine that with not only the crowd forcing some Baylor errors, but Baylor also not handling themselves well enough on the road, and you end up with the result you ended up with on Saturday night. Not to mention the late kickoff. We got to talk about that because, man, it is one thing watching Big 12 After Dark or Pac-12 After Dark when you're just kind of in and out of it, coming home after a long day. It's entirely another thing when you have to plan TV to watch it, and you're sitting there at 1 o'clock in the morning, and you're having to still focus on the game. It's a whole different world when you're doing that. But yeah, BYU, hats off, wonderful coaching job, wonderful execution. Baylor, though, I will say, they had a chance to win that game at multiple turns. And all that was going against them, and they still had a chance to win, which is why I had confidence in them going in. And it took double overtime to get the job done. Took some craziness, and man, it was something else. It was a great game.
Speaking of Chase Roberts, Garrett, put this up. Go ahead, Paul. Let's go ahead and get him.
Okay.
This is from Greg Rubel, who is the voice of Brigham Young, and from the desk of a writer. Chase Roberts, 8 catches, 122 yards versus Baylor, is the first BYU freshman to have 100-plus receiving yards in a game since Cody Hoppin in 2010. In the New Mexico Bowl, is the 6th BYU freshman to hit the 100-yard receiving plateau, and Baylor had no answer for him. His height, angular, ran pretty well, ran great routes, was a problem.
Yeah, he was. He was also a passing problem as well. Had the big touchdown pass to Jaren Hall. That was a huge play for them. So, yeah, I mean, he and Hall were a dynamic duo. I thought Baylor's defense still played pretty well for the most part. I mean, again, this is not a game that they were really executing very cleanly at all, and had obvious issues on offense, thanks in part to BYU's defense and thanks in part to that crowd, and still again found themselves there at the end. So I think that's a game for BYU that's obviously an all-time classic win, instant classic victory, definitely something that you can hang your hat on and feel great about, especially with the joining of the Big 12 coming up and knowing that you just went toe-to-toe and punch for punch and eventually landed the knockout on the defending champs. But I think Baylor's got some things to take away that they also can be proud of and build off of. It's not a good loss, but there were good things learned from it.
No, there was, and that's, you take what you saw and what you experienced, you move on to the very next week, and the next week includes Texas